Hello, how you doing? Welcome back to the channel. Before I get into the topic of today's video, I just want to say a huge thanks to everybody who's liked, subscribed and shared the videos so far. It's much appreciated. If you haven't already done so, please don't forget to hit the button. So today I'm going to share the process that I followed which helped me get a first class law degree. Before I go any further, let me just provide a little bit of context. I left school at 16 with very little qualifications. I might go into the detail of that in a later video, but for today's purposes, just know that when I went into university, I hadn't had a great deal of practice in studying for exams. And I developed this process over time at university, perfecting it along the way, and it took me from that person who had entered university through a non-traditional means to graduating with a first class degree. So if this process worked for me, hopefully there are some tips in here which you can take away and will help you do better at university as well. What I'm going to do is break it down into 4 relatively straightforward tips for you to follow. The first thing that you should do is organise your time. This sounds very basic, but it is so important to get the most out of your studying and reading time. It's also great practice for effective time management when you're practicing as a lawyer. Here's how I did it. I basically turned my life into this spreadsheet. I used this spreadsheet to organise and plan my time as much as possible while leaving some gaps and some room for flexibility and for social time and for downtime. I also included a to-do today column, which I updated in the morning with the things that I absolutely had to get done on that day, alongside columns which noted my submission deadlines and exams. You'll also notice that I left some of the spreadsheet blank, and that's for social stuff or whatever you do to chill out, because ultimately you are not going to do well at university if you are incredibly unhappy and stressed out. So it's important that you set aside time to relax as well. Setting aside that time to relax was also really important to help me not procrastinate, because I knew that I had, say, 2-3 hours on a Wednesday, so I could leave all my procrastination till then, and it helped me keep focused on the other days. Of course, creating the timetable is just the first step. You actually have to stick to it, and that takes me nicely onto my second tip, which is do the work. The first part is that there is just simply no substitute for actually doing the work. You have to make your way through the reading lists. You have to get your hands on the recommended textbooks and the recommended articles. You have to read them, you have to take notes, you have to highlight relevant sections, and make sure that you're doing that along the way so that you've got a bank of good notes to go to when it's time to revise for exams. But having an established routine helps you to do this stuff more effectively, and it builds a solid foundation for you to make sure that you're getting that work done. What I did was I treated going to university like it was my job. Imagine this is your first big case as a lawyer. It's you against your university. And just like when you go into practice, if you end up in litigation like me, the only way that you can increase your chances of getting a better result at court is if you properly prepare and you do the work. It's the exact same with essays and exams. And when you go along to lectures or tutorials or seminars and you've done the reading in advance, it puts you in a better position to be able to fill in those gaps, the stuff that you haven't understood fully from the reading. And that's a beautiful segue into the second part of this second tip, which is to engage with the materials. Trust me, I have been on both sides of the equation. I did a wee bit of lecturing between my diploma and starting my traineeship, and there is absolutely nothing worse than going and trying to speak at 25 or 300 blank faces. And what's more than that, the people who are in your classes will appreciate it because they probably wanted to ask the same questions as well. If my experience of leaving school at 16 with very little qualifications and then graduating with a first class degree tells you anything, it is that taking exams and writing essays is a skill that can be learned. And just like any other skill, the best way to learn that skill is to practice. So I would strongly advise you to get your hands on past papers as early in the semester as possible. As soon as a particular topic that comes up in the past papers quite often has been covered in class, it's a good idea to try and do a past paper question on that topic at that time. If you do that with each of the topics as you go along, by the time you're actually revising for the exams, you will have already tried several past paper questions on some of the topics that come up quite frequently. I always asked my lecturers if a particular topic would come up twice as well. For example, at a lot of law schools, if a particular topic is covered quite in depth in the essay, then it doesn't also come up in the exam that year. But that's always something to double check. One of the best tips that I ever received from one of my lecturers was to try to write about the law as often as possible. Engaging with topics in written form is great practice for structuring arguments, for identifying flaws in particular arguments and addressing those flaws with counter arguments. It's also great practice for being a lawyer because your clients will often ask you for a written summary of the law on a particular issue or for an advice note on their position. It's also really good practice for structuring essay question answers for exams, which, as if I'd scripted it that way, takes me beautifully on to my final point, which is think critically. Okay, for me this was the single biggest factor, I think, that took my answers from a 2-1 into first class territory. Now, I can do another video that goes into more detail on writing essays or writing exam answers, but let's just cover this off here because this applies to both. If you are asked a particular question, there are probably 3 levels of correct answer that you can give. Let's say level 1 is, this is the law, this is the answer. Very basic, but probably gets you a pass. The next level up, say level 2, would be, this is the law. Academic A says this about the direction of travel, which isn't necessarily consistent with the case law, so here's what I think the answer is. That's pretty good as well, and it's probably a slightly better answer than the example I gave for level 1, but when I really saw my grades start to increase is when I went just slightly further in my analysis. So for example, you would say, this is the case law or the position in legislation. Academic A says this, academic B says that. Here is my critique, which is based on the materials that I was told to read and consume for the class. In those scenarios, you might agree with academic A if the materials support that and you can make a reasoned argument for it. You might agree with academic B, or you might even introduce your own critical analysis of the materials that you've been told to read for the class and make an entirely novel argument. So long as that's backed up by the materials, I found that that was the difference between getting a high 2-1 and getting a first class when I got the grades back. Of course, I got a lot better at this as I progressed through university, which is why it was so important to have a routine, to do the work and engage with the materials, to practice past papers and to write about the law as often as possible. That seems like a pretty good place to wrap up this video. If you want me to go into more detail on exams or essays, please just let me know in the comments below. Before you go, don't forget to like, subscribe and share this video to your uni group chat. If there's anything else that you want me to cover in any future videos, please leave a comment or reach out to me on social media. For now, thank you very much for watching and I'll see you again in the next video.